What's up, guys? Also Footballtalk here, back one final time for a divisional draft and roster review series. We've already gone through each of the 7 other divisions, so today we close things out in the AFC West with the Broncos, Chiefs, Raiders and Chargers. One more time we'll go through every single player those teams drafted, with a quick scouting report, discuss the role in the new squad, talk about each class as a whole in the context of what the rest of the roster looked like, and then at the end of the video, we'll compare what those division foes were able to accomplish with the draft capital available. Before we kick things off, please, if you do enjoy the analysis, just give me a quick thumbs up, subscribe for all my content if you haven't done so yet, and let a friend or two know about the channel. Unlike most TV networks, I try to provide real analysis instead of the random talking points that always come back at this point of the calendar year, and will continue doing so throughout the depths of the off-season. Which brings me to a quick reminder, the link to our page hellosoffootballtalk.com is down below in the description, along with my social media handles, if you want to keep up with everything I do. But now, let's get into this one more time though, and we start things off with the Denver Broncos, who didn't want to wait all the way until the 3rd round, but instead swapped the 4th for a 6th rounder with the Lions to secure themselves Oklahoma speedster wide receiver Marvin Mims 5 spots earlier than originally slated at 63rd overall. Then he come back 4 spots later with Drew Sanders, the linebacker at Arkansas, late in the 3rd round, 83rd overall, Riley Moss, cornerback Iowa, then in the 6th round, 183rd overall, J.L. Skinner, safety Boise State, and then in the 7th round, 257th overall, Alex Forsyth, interior offensive lineman Oregon. So as for Mims, fairly small receiver, but at 5'11", just over 180 pounds, he's actually bigger than a lot of the guys in this draft with high expectations, has the 4.38 speed to blow by people, illustrated by his insane 16.7 yard average depth of target for his career. He was constantly deployed, stressing defenses vertically down the seams on slot fade routes, but he's also excellent at changing up his pace as he's working through zone coverage and did not show on passes with people converging on him. While he doesn't have that ball winner frame, the way he tracks the ball down the field and puts himself in position to win through contact is significantly better than another guy from the Big 12 that went in the 1st round, for example, and we'll get to later here, in former TCU standout and now Charger Quentin Johnston. Mims made several incredible acrobatic grabs with a defender on him, and he swiftly turns up the field after the grab, reducing his shoulders and squeezing through a couple of tacklers coming from different angles. He was allowed to constantly work against off coverage and rarely got challenged during the route stem, while not being asked to make a ton of sharp breaks. Along with that, if he remains mostly in the slot, those bigger bodies he'll be facing there will give him trouble in the run game. For Denver to have Courtland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy and Tim Patrick on the roster already, when we've heard trade rumors about all 3 at some point, along with KJ Hamler not having been able to stay on the field healthy, and Montreal Washington probably having a spot thanks to his services in the return game, you can tell Sean Payton really wanted this guy, giving up that kind of draft capital. The guys that are there already, combined with probably the least vertical passing game coordinator in the league in Joe Lombardi, really has me questioning what the exact plan is here, but Payton will probably make this pick worth it. Then we get to a player I can envision a much clearer role for, under Vance Joseph, a defensive coordinator. Drew Sanders is a former 5-star recruit for Alabama as an edge defender who transferred to Arkansas this past season for a largely off-ball role, while they still utilized him as a pressure player regularly, where his burst of the ball, the way he can link his upper and lower half, made him very effective, with 9.5 sacks and 39 total pressures across just under 150 rush opportunities. Playing off the ball, he's definitely still learning the details of the position when it comes to not overrunning plays, cleanly deconstructing blocks, since he does have the force in his hands to stack and shed at times, not just covering grass and zone to some degree, and is tackling in space, as he missed just under 20% of his attempts this past season. Now, you do certainly like the active hands to work off contact. He can be very slippery with slicing through a gap before a lineman can combo off to him and forcing the issue. He's light on his feet to cover ground and then explode forward in coverage, plus he's a mismatch against running backs in protection. And that's kind of where I expect him to excel as a rookie already, with how aggressive Vance Joseph is with bringing extra bodies to create issues for the protection, where he can rush this guy from all different kinds of angles, bail him out at times after being mugged up in a gap, and maybe undercut a hot route, and in a bunch of creative ways simply, to where he could really fill the stat sheet, even though he may be behind Alex Singleton to start the season, before he ultimately plugs in next to Josie Jewell. Then later in the 3rd, the Broncos went defense again, and they once again made a significant move up from 108 to 83 in exchange for a 3rd rounder next year for Riley Moss. Good size for an outside press corner at 6'1", 195 pounds, but is actually at his best clicking and closing on routes in off-zone coverage. The football intelligence and the way he studies the game show up all over his tape, understanding formation, situational cues, recognizing route patterns developing, and either midpointing stuff as a conflict defender or actively driving on routes. His long speed wasn't tested a whole lot in the Big Ten, in part also because the Hawkeyes were running zone so extensively, but you didn't actually see him get run by guys in soft press or be worried about prematurely flipping his hips. Yet if he did allow some early separation during the route, he showcased some impressive closing bursts at times, which was also on display a couple of times during Senior Bowl week, along with the way he could dislodge the ball from the receiver when he arrived at the catch points. Great ball skills, is actively looking to disengage from blocks, and a reliable tackler. The things that concern you: sub 30-inch arms that will mitigate his ability to sustain contact when asked to jam guys in press, too often allows crafty route runners to lose him at the break point, and on vertical routes he gets stacked a lot, where even if he were to catch up, he would have to go through the target, especially with those shorter arms. There were some conversations about Moss moving to safety, and I thought he could play inside for some teams, but having signed K'Wan Williams this past offseason, Kareem Jackson being brought back for one more year, a month after the draft, and having selected another guy later in between those two positions, he'll be competing with Amari Mathis for the second starting spot, opposite Pat Surtain. And of course, it's hilarious to finally have another white corner out there, who may get a bunch of picks just based on quarterbacks thinking, that boy can't run with my guy. That brings us to another DB I just mentioned in J.L. Skinner, somebody who went later than originally expected, due to a torn pec during the pre-draft process, presenting a profile that is intriguing but also kind of worrisome. Insanely long build at 6'4", 210 pounds, has said in the past that he molds his game after Cam Chancellor, as somebody who doesn't shy away from filling the C-gap, overwhelm slot receivers assigned with blocking him, and can create stalemates in the hole against bigger backs. While his profile would indicate a more extensive box role, he was actually deployed as a single high safety regularly, where he did a good job of identifying the biggest threat, and showed plus route recognition in more split field coverages, along with his 32-inch arms, being a great tool to frustrate tight ends one-on-one, with better short area bursts than you'd expect due to his high-waisted build, and he's extremely feisty when the ball arrives at the target. Seeing him on the field down in Mobile, how gangly his build is, and the stiffness he showed changing directions with those long legs when asked to play man coverage against receivers definitely worried me, while as a tackle and overall defending the run from depth, the aggressiveness gets punished at times, and it creates opportunities for big plays. Very interested to see how exactly Vance will try to get value out of this guy, because he's not a perfect fit at any spot necessarily, but he could be a tight end specialist and versatile pressure player as a rookie potentially, while next to Justin Simmons, some of the worries you may have about him in space could be helped out if you do want to give him extensive run in 2024. And finally, with the third to last pick of the entire draft, Denver gets one of my personal favorites on the interior offensive line. Alex Forsyth isn't going to be somebody who just overpowers straight nose tackles near the point of attack on inside zone or gap schemes. While in the pass game, his eyes drop too often as he initiates contact, and because of that high sense of gravity, those long, strong interior rushers can attack his chest and drive him back into the depth of the pocket. The snap and first step are simultaneous for him, with impressive agility to reach block and cut off angles for guys on the second level in wide zone. You love his mobility to be used as a puller, and how he adjusts if the defensive picture changes post-snap. Quickly gets to his landmarks in pass pro, with the athletic feet to mirror guys, and times up his strikes like an NFL veteran already, along with using his nearly 33-inch arms to feel and counter rushers sliding over his way late during plays. Very interested to watch if he can see the field at some point this year, because I was surprised to see how little Denver has beyond the starting five, after Peyton signed a couple of new starters in Ben Powers and Mike McGlinchey. But a lot of what they have there would make you think the run scheme would revolve around gap schemes and place hitting inside, but I still don't see anybody in the second string that would definitely be favored over Forsyth. By the way, Sean Payton moved back for the Forsyth pick in exchange for selection just inside the top 200 in order to bring over a guy he drafted in the comp pick territory a couple of years ago with New Orleans in tight end Adam Troutman. So now with him, a guy Denver selected in the forefront themselves that year in Albert Aquaquinum, and last year's third rounder Greg Dulcich, they have one of my favorite rooms of tight ends, and I'm looking forward to seeing sets with multiple of those guys on the field at the same time, and how they can dictate terms to the defense. So Peyton definitely put a stamp on this draft, moving up from Mims and Moss, trading for Adam Troutman, along with already having spent substantial financial resources on regrouping the offensive line, while he allowed Lance Joseph to bring in a guy he worked with in Arizona and Zach Allen on the defensive line, and then investing most of the draft capital into that side of the ball. I think Mims was solid value for where he was picked, even though I think Denver should have tried to acquire more shots at players, rather than trading up for two of the first three guys selected. I think Sanders could be a lot of fun in the advanced Joseph system, and I had him inside my top 50 players. you get a couple of aggressive guys in the secondary that could offer some versatility down the road, and a backup offensive lineman that could stick in the league through a couple of contracts. So overall I thought while a depth on the offensive line was an area they could and should have addressed, I really like the pieces that they did bring in to complement and improve upon what they already had in the roster. Now it'll be up to Peyton and the offense he can put around Russell Wilson to reinvigorate him to some degree, as the defense is making a major shift schematically and probably won't be quite as dominant as they were for most of 2022. Our next team now, the reigning Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs, who made exactly one selection in each of the 7 rounds. First round, 31st overall, Felix Anudike-Uzomah, edge defender Kansas State. Second round, 55th overall, Rashee Rice, wide receiver SMU. Third round, 92nd overall, Wanya Morris, offensive tackle Oklahoma. Fourth round, 119th overall, Jamari Conner, safety Virginia Tech. Fifth round, 166th overall, B.J. Thompson, edge defender Stephen F. Austin. Sixth round, 194th overall, Keandre Coburn, interior defensive lineman Texas. And in the 7th round, 250th overall, Nick Jones, cornerback Ball State. KC had several different paths they could have gone here. Some people thought they'd move up for an offensive weapon. I thought they might do so for that second tackle spot. Instead, they kept investing into the defensive front and got Chiefs Kingdom hyped up when they selected a guy from nearby Kansas State in Felix Anudike-Uzomah. Somebody who may only be listed at 6'3", 255 pounds, but I thought watching him through the last 2 years always felt like the type of powerful, long defensive end the Chiefs are typically coveted. Has those strong triceps, which allow him to lock out and gain vision on the ball carrier near the point of attack. Yet if you put him on the backside and someone tries to seal him there, he will ride that guy into the pile and create traffic, along with being more than happy to crash through the wrong shoulder of pullers to do the same. While he's average in terms of size for an edge rusher, everything he does is built of power, and he consistently tries to take the shortest path towards the quarterback, working off the long arm and then swimming inside once he gets tackles to lean, or give a slight jab towards the B-gap in order to create soft outside edge that he can dip around with impressive balance to win through contact. However, I would like to see him defeat the hands and get those clean wins more regularly instead of always engaging with pass protectors, and learn how to flatten at the top of his rush after gaining a step up the field. While in the run game, too often he just launches himself into blockers, doesn't keep the outside arm free, and gets caught out of position by misdirection at times. So like I said, Felix certainly fits the type of profile they're typically looking for in Kansas City, but with Frank Clark still in the open market, while having drafted George Karlaftis late in the first round a year ago, and Charles Omenihu being signed in for agency, I would have guessed they might want to acquire more of that high rusher and finisher type as they get quarterbacks to retreat or escape out wide. And I think the Chiefs definitely overpaid to move up for Rashee Rice, as the package picked 63, 122 and 249 for that 55th overall selection and number 194. Right off the bat, Rice to me was an early day free player, so I hate this value to be honest. Now I do understand the idea here, after Juju Smith-Schuster went to New England for agency and didn't replace that type of power slot with speed and playmaking ability in space around him already, so they can attack those windows in zone coverage with a physical receiver at the catch point. At a dense 6'5", 205 pounds, Rice is flexible in the lower half to sit in the chair and execute crisp breaks, whilst understanding how to vary his speed on the fly and slowing down as he enters soft spots in the coverage. He regularly is able to create some late separation for his hands to attack the ball by nudging off defenders at his hip or high shoulder and plucking the ball off the top shelf, along with having some start-stop quicks once the ball is secured and churning out yards for contact. Plus he takes his blocking assignment seriously, latching his hands and continuing to move his base in order to shield bodies. However, he has a really tough time releasing against press due to lacking any type of quick twitch, and is not a dynamic separator necessarily. Dropped 9 passes last season, largely due to taking his eyes off the ball with a defender in range, and he needs to do a better job of protecting it in traffic. I just can't get on board with this, considering how relatively easy it is to acquire that type of skill set, I believe. While finding a tackle prospect like Wanya Morris to me is a lot tougher. You're looking at a 6'5", 315-pound offensive tackle with impressive movement skills and just over 35-inch arms. Looks more like an oversized tight end, who's very explosive out of his stance, able to cut off guys in the B-gap on the backside of wide zone, wrap around on GT power, and loose enough in his hips to peel back on pursuit defenders, whilst packing a lot of force in his hands in order to twist guys to the turf late at times. Gains plenty of ground vertically and laterally in his pass sets to beat wide rushers to spots and then guide them past the quarterback if they try to still work around him, while regularly being first to initiate contact with those long arms and being pretty advanced with his hand usage already in the way he deploys them independently, combined with smooth redirecting laterally against counters. His height creates some challenges in terms of sticking at his hips and finding leverage. The footwork in the run game is still pretty unrefined, and because of how low he carries his hands, aggressive bull rush attempts can really challenge him. However, I think he's a guy that is worth an investment at the end of the top 100 because he has the potential to be a legit starting tackle in this league, even though technically he still has a ways to go. I actually linked Kansas City to one year's teammate on the opposite end of the line at OU and Anton Harrison, but they've since signed what was one of the worst starters at left tackle last season in Donovan Smith, and now the plan is to start him there, while Lucas Niang should be the primary backup on either edge, and this kid is stashed to develop. Jamari Conner is somebody who at 6 foot, 205 pounds, transitioned from almost a pure slot role to splitting time more evenly between that, the box, and in deep coverage, in part because of his exceptional feel for spacing, getting dead balls, deciphering patterns, and also peeking at the quarterback. His best work is still probably done in press man, where he can reroute receivers with plenty of force in his hands and clean footwork to stay attached through the stem. Approaches blockers with a strong two and a punch to keep his frame clean, and he provides some hefty stopping power as a tackler. He also tested in the 71st percentile or better across the board in the combat events that he participated in. Unfortunately, he lacks the long speed to stick with speedy receivers on vertical routes, which ends with him grabbing them too often. He could still work on his ability to turn his head and look at the football in order to make a play on it. And as a tackler, he tends to dive at the feet of ball carriers or loses his balance in the open field more than he'd like to see. I thought Conner could be at his best as a big nickel and a matchup player against tight ends. So this is maybe a reaction to one of the biggest rivals in the Bills drafting Utah's Dalton Kincaid in the first round, and to some degree the Raiders picking Notre Dame's Michael Mayer early in the second, while they may want to play Justin Reed deep more extensively after they let Juan Thornhill walk in free agency. Round 5, they go with a developmental edge rusher out of Stephen F. Austin, who comes in with a pretty ridiculous athletic profile. B.J. Thompson is 6'5.5", 245 pounds, and tested in the 95th percentile at his pro day if you project it to the combine. Definitely lacks a certain bulk to his frame, and is more focused on ripping underneath blockers and getting up the field in the run game, but he plays hard and continues to work in that area, especially considering he probably played somewhere in the 220 range and is now beefed up, while still putting up those kind of athletic measurements. Doesn't fully understand how to set up his pass rush moves yet and stack them on top of each other, while generally snap anticipation could use some work, but he has the burst off the field to really threaten the corner. He's sudden and fluid with the way he can turn his body and dip the near shoulder underneath blockers to bend around them, and whether it's a club swim or spin move to win inside, that can be deadly. Thompson kind of reminded me of watching James Houston IV at Jackson State last year, who was extremely productive as a rotational pass rusher over the second half of the NFL season for the Lions. He's a little further away technically and mentally, I would say, but the physical upside may actually be even greater if he can eventually be the type of guy for the Chiefs who don't have those guys up front other than Chris Jones with real juice. I think that's a nice investment. Keandre Coburn isn't nearly as flashy, but instead is a rock-solid nose tackle with certain limitations athletically. 6'1", just under 340 pounds, but does carry that weight really well. Primarily played 0 and 1 technique as the rock in the middle of a Texas defense, which held opponents to just 3.5 yards per carry. Packs some violent hands to knock guys off balance and not allow them to cut off his path trying to reach or scoop block him, and he does a nice job of dropping that knee closer to the angle blocker and using his joints to absorb force and double teams to allow his linebackers to run freely. Yet he also certainly improved as a pass rusher, especially using his natural leverage advantage to take away the space for quarterbacks to step up or create chaos by crashing through the face of blockers and opening up a lane for his fellow rushers. Only his 31.5-inch arms, which limits his ability to keep vision through blocks, and no real secondary rush moves, while having tested in the 27th percentile or worse across the board in Indy. So while the Chiefs did bring in Danny Shelton for a year at just under $1.2 million, what some people call the stump, might turn himself into the backup nose there behind Derek Nadi as another one of those unsung heroes to help out the Chiefs' run defense that has come through when needed most at the end of the season. And finally, Nick Jones was one of my favorite late-round sleeper cornerbacks in this draft. Prototype size with 32.5-inch arms and well-coordinated feet, showing the athletic confidence not prematurely driving routes because he trusts his explosiveness to close that gap to the target. Features some impressive speed turns if tilted the wrong way initially, shows plus awareness for route combinations and how to position himself accordingly against them in zone coverage, and he plays through the midst of the receiver exceptionally well. Didn't quite clear the 4.5 mark in the 40. We'll see some guys be able to nudge or press him off late to create a little bit of separation for the ball to arrive, and I'd like to see him do a better job of leaning into contact in order to feel comfortable turning his head for the football as he's tangled up with somebody down the field. Plus he comes in too hard as a tackler too often. but this very much reminds me of the Jalen Watson pick in the 7th round just last year, who I outlined as one of my guys in the 2022 draft, hoping Jones makes that roster and gets a chance, and I think he will. So altogether, the idea of taking shots at some very athletic, high-ceiling prospects on the edges of the offensive and defensive lines makes sense for a team that pays its front-runner players as much as they do, and potentially finding solutions to some capacity at high-value positions. I think Coburn and Nick Jones both make it through cuts, and we see them make an impact if there are some injuries eventually. However, Felix Uzoma a little bit early for me, and not really the type of pass rusher I thought they still needed, but rather what they like there, and I just cannot get on board with the Rashee Rice pick. With the extra capital I gave up here in order to move up for him, that was basically a top 50 pick, when I didn't even believe the player was worth a top 100 selection. When they made the move, I thought it was for Tennessee's speed team and Jalen Hyatt, just because of the vision of Patrick Mahomes launching 70-yard bombs to him. I understand wanting to replace that type of pass catcher in the mold of Juju, but not in exchange for that kind of draft capital, when I think he's a lesser version of that actually. So that definitely drags down what Britt Veach did here significantly for me, and it'll reflect itself in the draft rankings at the end of this video. But now, let's move on to the Las Vegas Raiders, who led the division with 9 total selections, which were 1st round, 7th overall, Tyree Wilson, edge defender Texas Tech, 2nd round, 35th overall, Michael Mayer, tight end Notre Dame, and 2 third rounders, 70th overall, Byron Young, interior defensive lineman Alabama, and 100th overall, Trey Tucker, wide receiver Cincinnati. 2 guys at the top and the back end of the 4th round, Jacorian Bennett, cornerback Maryland, and Aiden O'Connell, quarterback Purdue. In the 5th round, 170th overall, Chris Smith II, safety Georgia. 6th round, 203rd overall, Amari Burney, linebacker Florida. And then in the 7th round, 231st overall, Nesta Gilles-Silvera, interior defensive lineman Arizona State. So they start things off by taking advantage of a slight dip for Tyree Wilson due to some worries about his foot injury that kept him from showing off his freakish athleticism during the pre-draft process. He'll put on the tape, and it's easy to tell this dude is an alien, 6'6", 275 pounds, with an insane combination of 35.5-inch arms and the ability to overpower offensive linemen at contact. You regularly see him drive guys backwards at the point of attack, can lock out tackles with one arm, and takes tight ends being assigned with him as a personal insult, but also blows up pullers behind the line of scrimmage and creates disruption by slanting across the face of blockers. As a pass rusher, he unleashes a devastating bull rush, and he has the sudden burst to work around large men as he lifts them off the ground. Uncanny ability to regain his balance after being caught in weird positions, and frequently is able to free himself off the reach of blockers with those lanky limbs. He had at 275 pounds, the ability to give a little shake and cross-face guys in the blink of an eye is jaw-dropping. He's certainly not where he needs to be in terms of block recognition and approaching run schemes accordingly, while his plan and execution to win clean as a pass rusher is still being worked on. Yet his rate of pressures per pass rush snap of 19.2% last season was actually higher than Alabama's Will Anderson Jr. and others, who would be labeled as more pro-ready. This was my number 5 overall prospect, and if his foot is fine, he has the potential to become a legit Pro Bowl to All-Pro level player. Max Crosby is already an under-the-radar superstar defender, but Chandler Jones has not been at all what you would have hoped for, and then Jordan Willis is the only established depth player along there. So this could pay off big time for them down the road, for a defense that has only had one real difference maker among it. Vegas gave up pick 141 to move up 3 spots in that 2nd round for Notre Dame tight end Michael Mayer. There's been a lot of slander towards his name, and a year ago I feel like this was still looked at as a potential top 10 pick, which makes early 2nd round a bit surprising. I do agree that he's not the type of blocker yet that you'd like to see in terms of lunging and losing his balance too much, which limits his ability to sustain, while you're looking at a fairly average athlete with 4.7 speed and just not the most dynamic separator in terms of exploding out of his breaks. With that being said, he's naturally powerful and brings great effort, which has me confident in projecting him to take care of a variety of assignments as an inline blocking option, while already taking DBs for a ride when he gets his hands on them if you get him out to the edge. As a receiver, you get great flexibility in terms of alignments, effectively being able to roll off either foot, uses the frame well to lean in, slightly push off guys to create separation against man, along with working around bodies in more static zone looks, while constantly extending for the ball and instantly tucking it away. Shows no issues at all slightly contorting his body, shielding defenders, and swallowing the ball with somebody initiating contact with him. Plus, then he covers more ground than you think with those long strides, and he becomes a locomotive trying to bring him down once he's gained momentum. The Raiders did sign Austin Hooper as your flagship starter you're just looking to upgrade from, and OJ Howard is there now too, but you get a guy that can be a real difference maker in both facets of the game, who can help out what was a very poor red zone offense, especially after trading away Darren Waller to the Giants, which they got back pick 100 for. And I want to quickly skip ahead here with this pick, because my tone changes here a little bit with a very different skill position player on offense in Cincinnati's Trey Tucker. Looking at his 1-for-8 10-yard split, he has elite acceleration, but can also stop abruptly and challenge defenders with the way he comes out of his breaks. You like what he could provide as a fly sweep and end-around guy to add some dynamism to an offense that has two more savvy route running and possession-style slot receivers in Hunter Renfrow and recently signed Jacoby Myers, who Josh McDaniels wanted to reunite with, but really short arms at just under 29 inches and tiny hands, dropped just over 10% of his catchable targets last season, and will have a certain adjustment period with the way he runs routes due to the excessive movements that he incorporates. So while I understand that this is not just a one-for-one trade, considering you're moving on from a massive deal in place of the one of a mid-round pick, and there was some bad feelings between the two parties, but basically giving away Darren Waller for this type of player and just reaching on him in general when he was projected to go in the 200s, I just can't get on board with. Now going back for the picks again, they did select a much more steady presence on the defensive line in Byron Young, this one being from Alabama, since we had another one from Tennessee on the edge, 6'3", 290 pounds, with 34.5-inch arms and monstrous 11-inch hands. Your prototypical Crimson Tide at the end, who lined up shaded inside, outside or head up on offensive tackles, seems to always play with great leverage and hand placement, delivering plenty of force at first contact, yet also shows plus block recognition to counter the first steps, and has the ability to blow through the reach of guys if you want to use him in more of a penetration style front. The way he was deployed didn't set him up for a big production in the pass game, but he still did have a solid win rate of 12.5% last season, being able to work the depth of the pocket with great leg drive and bull rushes, swats down the hands of blockers effectively when he's lined up on the edges, and just outworks guys a lot of times to come free late, along with being an effective setup man on twists and getting his big paws up to bat down passes at the line. I'd say he's a bit lethargic off the snap and isn't really looking to make plays in the run game, in large part due to what he was taught to do, but also lacking that high-level short area burst, and he's also more of a straight-line pass rusher without the flexibility to corner and pull off any dynamic moves one-on-one. So maybe not what I described as an impact play producer up front, but other than maybe Banal Nichols, he's probably the most trustworthy guy on the interior week 1 who can play all 3 downs, because he's a top-tier run stopper and can either create softer angles for those outside rushers or help free them up on gap exchange stuff. Let me go a little quicker here on the day 3 guys now. Jacorian Bennett, the other Maryland corner, not quite on the same level of athlete now giant Deonte Banks is, based on what I saw on tape, but while he's slightly smaller at 5'11 and 190 pounds, he actually outperformed his former teammate at the combine with a 4.3 in the 40 and elite jumps. Plays with a lot of confidence, as you see a bunch of reps where he's almost playing flat-footed and runs right in the hip pocket of receivers down the field. Generally shows good feel for mid-pointing patterns as a zone defender, has experience playing inside and out, and it's not just an ankle bite as a tackler, wrapping and holding up bulk areas in order for his buddies to be able to join the party. I'd like to see him proactively throw off the timing of routes, hand fight more to stop receivers from stacking him vertically, and in a run game you see him cheat inside and lose contain too often. But Vegas had very few proven options on the perimeter in particular, where this guy might win a starting job right away, battling against David Long Jr., Duke Shelley, and Brendan Faison. I was curious when the Raiders might get involved in the quarterback group. They did so late in the 4th round with Aiden O'Connell, a former walk-on at Purdue in 2017, who took a while to really make an impact and will already turn 25 years old by week 1, but does offer a compact, consistent release, puts the right trajectory and pace on the ball for the most part, showed the mental capacity in a pro-style offense to make quick decisions, being capable of executing full-field reads and frequently hitting his targets right out of the breaks on time-based routes. And he already shows advanced pocket navigation, in particular climbing and launching down the field after somebody flushes off the edge. I just see some awareness issues for ancillary zone defenders, and in particular handling new information on simulated pressures, slow plodding feeds trying to get away from guys when he needs to leave the pocket, and what can really drive you nuts about him at times is that Jameis Winston mindset, where he thinks he can fit the ball into any type of window and lacks that off button, indicated by a turnover-worthy play rate of 4.4% last season. So actually kind of reminds you of a mixture between Winston and Jimmy G, where he shares some of the bad tendencies, but in the right system, with boundaries given by the play caller there, and if he can be accountable, could be a starter for a certain stretch at some point in the pros, but just outside my top 10 quarterbacks, so getting his number 8 and a couple of the guys that went after him, I'm not like a big fan of. I do really like Chris Smith II, however. He was my number 6 safety, and worth of an early to mid 3rd round pick I believe. Has the quality I've raved about with Georgia safeties multiple times before, where he comes downhill from depth and just accelerates into contact and plays up to the perimeter, blowing up the guy with the ball before the play can really even get going, yet understands when he's the last line of defense, and is mostly a reliable open field tackler, putting his face mask into the frame of opponents and driving his legs through contact. Has plenty of starting experience and put on a bunch of different hats for the most dominant college defense over the last 2 years, with active feet and excellent instincts to play deep. He'd also been patient when asked to man up against the number 3 in trips, not allowing bigger bodies to knock him off, whilst having the snappy hips to reattach to the hip pocket of guys trying to beat him across the field. Whether it's timing up when he drives forwards, playing top down, or just attacking the catch point when he's close to the target, he routinely was able to dislodge the ball when targeted. The reason he was selected this late probably is that he showed up at the combine weighing 192 pounds and ran a 4.62 in the 40. While most of his man coverage snaps, he was allowed to funnel targets towards the deep coverage rather than sticking with guys down the field, and last season he came in 2 out as a tackler at times. Still, I don't believe he should have ever fallen this far, and I don't see those same type of speed concerns on tape, so to potentially get a number 3 safety, Benjamin Merrick, and recently signed Marcus Epps this late is tremendous. Unfortunately, I only watched Ventrell Miller in terms of Florida linebackers, and can't really see Amari Burney flash to me when I was checking out the tape, but I do have some thoughts on Nestor Silvera. Presents a wide, dense frame and natural leverage advantage against most interior blockers, along with the power to regularly create traffic on the interior. Shows some pretty impressive ability to flow with zone runs, yet he can also own his space against vertical combos, and has the strength to sling running backs to the turf as they're trying to shoot past him. Other than riding guys backwards to a certain degree, Silvera doesn't provide much of a pass rush profile, and was taken off the field by Miami and Arizona State quite a bit. But in terms of another rotational piece on the inside, who can give you quality snaps on early downs, and you can trust to stay in his pass rush lanes or spike into blockers in order to create lanes for loopers, this is a solid addition in the 7th round. All in all, I think there's a lot to build on here with this Raiders draft class. If Tyree Wilson's foot turns out to be less of a story than what it was made out to be shortly before this draft kicked off, and they get that second edge rusher along with Max Crosby that they hope Chandler Jones could be, this defense under Patrick Graham gets a huge boost because the back 7 is still being rebuilt, and maybe a zone-heavy approach could mitigate some talent shortcomings when they were doing a lot of funky shit with changing up the picture post-snap to get even some of the better quarterbacks into trouble. I think Meyer can be a valuable offensive piece for up to a decade, even though he may never be a star player, and the same could be said for Byron Young on the interior D-line, although he won't put up the numbers to back it up. Chris Smith at pick 170 is awesome value, but otherwise I didn't love what they did in the middle rounds, in particular with Trey Tucker as a gadget type player at pick 100, and my big issue, or at least question here, is how they didn't invest a single selection into the offensive line, when at least 2 of the 5 starting spots could absolutely be weaklings, and they don't have many promising young pieces beyond that. Thankfully, they did sign an undrafted free agent in McClellan Curtis from UT Chattanooga, who I thought could have easily been a top 200 pick, so let's see if they can patch the unit together somehow, and how they might deal with injuries coming up along the way, because while Josh McDaniels and Jimmy G have experience working together, and some of the solutions they might come up with getting the ball out quickly to mitigate some of those issues up front, that could spell disaster if the veteran quarterback feels uncomfortable back there. And now, Team 32 in this divisional draft and roster breakdown series, the Los Angeles Chargers, who just like the Chiefs had exactly 1 pick in each round. First round, 21st overall, Quentin Johnston, wide receiver TCU. Second round, 54th overall, Tuli Tuipulotu, edge defender USC. Third round, 85th overall, Diane Henley, linebacker Washington State. Fourth round, 125th overall, Darius Davis, wide receiver TCU. Fifth round, 156th overall, Jordan McFadden, offensive tackle/interior offensive lineman Clemson. Sixth round, pick 200, Scott Matlock, interior defensive lineman at Boise State. And then the 7th round, 239th overall, Max Duggan, quarterback TCU. So the Chargers got onto the clock at 21st overall, and with Ohio State's Jackson Smith-Njigba going 1 pick earlier, they otherwise had the pick of the litter in terms of wide receivers in this draft. Zay Flowers from Boston College was my wide receiver 1, and you could have argued for USC's Jordan Addison here too, as we ultimately saw 4 names come off the board in consecutive order, but the Bolts went with Quentin Johnston, and I believe the one big reason that they did so was this number, 8.9 yards after the catch per reception. Other than a receiver from Louisiana Monroe, the only other guy to average more than that was actually Johnston's teammate Darius Davis, who we'll still get to in a couple of minutes. For being 6'3", 205 pounds, how quickly Johnston gets to full speed, Yet then how sudden he is in short areas is truly remarkable. He did a lot of damage on the vertical plane, along snapping off curls and comebacks, as defenses had to respect what he could do over the top. Yet when the Horned Frog sent him a little shallow cross out of motion, that's where things really got scary, because the way he could start and stop, but then also stride away from guys who you'd think on tape should get him, that is pretty wild. With that being said, he wasn't asked to run many intricate routes, and what really bothered me, and why I had him as number 4 in the top tier of wide receivers that I started with, is the way he approaches the ball. Way too often you see him leave his feet unnecessarily, and passes hit him in the chest, or not hauling in contested catch opportunities, despite a 40.5-inch vertical jump and his powerful frame, as he only brought in 8 of 23 of those opportunities last season. So I personally would have absolutely gone with Zay Flowers here instead, but if Johnson fixes the way he catches the ball, which supposedly was largely based on an eye discipline issue, since he does have some impressive grabs on tape, he has a chance to become the biggest pass-catching weapon from this draft, and for a team that desperately lacked some speed and run-off-the-catch threat, it makes sense. Tuli Tuipulotu at 54 is a very interesting prospect. At 6'4", 275 pounds, Tuli was listed as an interior defensive lineman early on looking at most draft rankings, but he played primarily on the edge, and if any other position was appropriate, he might actually be off-ball linebacker, because the Trojans asked him to be a playmaker in that regard, slicing through creases when he saw an opportunity to create negative plays in the run game, and winning from different angles as a pass rusher. When he did line up on the edge, he was a clear mismatch against tight ends, and was able to lock out and jet offensive tackles for the most part as well. For being as big as he is, his first step and how fluid he is in his movements is almost odd to watch. Packs those rip-throughs and long arms to against the edge for power, but you see him land some cross chops, almost Euro-step tackles, but jabbing the opposite way of where he wants to go, and that can surprise blockers with a rapid spin move every once in a while. I don't think he has the speed to run them plays from the backside with great consistency, or win the corner of the second and third step as an outside rusher, while at this point he doesn't really seem to set up his moves or string them together in a very cohesive way yet. Maybe most importantly, he needs to clean up his tackling, where he missed over 30% of his attempts in 2022. So I'm very interested to see what his usage looks like under Brandon Staley and company, since the Chargers have Joey Bosa and Khalil Mack there, but very little beyond that on the edge, and then he could be used as a spinner that they line up on the interior and work on different stunts, or flat out blitz him from different alignments of the ball, especially when they would go to dime, or just want to pull Eric Kendricks off the field at times. With that being said, they did go legit stand-up linebacker around later with Diane Henley, part of the top tier 3 linebackers in my personal rankings, maybe a little undersized at 6'5", 225 pounds, but the dude is built like a Greek god, shows some rare quick twitch and short area agility to step around blockers, yet he doesn't shy away from crashing into guys either when needed, provides tremendous range to run them plays from the backside, and is a great tackler who will alligator roll a lasso guys to the ground in space, only missing 5 of 111 attempts this past season. More importantly even, his movement skills as a coverage defender, to be tight in his change of direction, the way he can pick up and run with crossers, and how explosively he drives some stuff in front of him, combined with how he was able to shut down his running backs during Senior Bowl week when given a chance to man up, and how effective his hand swipes are already to win as a blitzer. All of that is high level. His Nevada tape wasn't nearly as good, it's more of a see-ball, get-ball type of player. You still see the eyes get trapped in the backfield pretty regularly, while you may want to protect him from actually trying to stack and shed against bigger bodies to some degree schematically. I just mentioned Kendricks being signed as a free agent to join former first rounder Kenneth Murray, who's still hoping the game will slow down for him eventually, but neither of those guys keeps him from putting this kid on the field for a large extent, and I think he has a chance to ultimately lead this group in snaps. The last 4 I'll go a lot quicker on. I already referenced Darius Davis at 125, as somebody who actually outdid former teammate Quentin Johnston with his 9.9 yards after the catch on average. Actually reminds me a lot of what I said about the other Cincinnati receiver in Trey Tucker, who the Raiders have thought reached on at pick 100. 4.36 speed with crazy acceleration. TCU set up opportunities for him to create explosive plays, catching crosses of mesh concepts, throwing quick screens, fly sweeps, reverses, all of the above, but also short and small with tiny hands, very two-dimensional route run at this point, with a bunch of vertical and crossing patterns, and had the same amount of drops as contested catches at 5. Didn't love the value here for that type of player, but I'm guessing even more so here what to get in return for that investment is a return specialist, as he was a first-team All-American in that role, taking a punt and kickoff through the house this past season. Otherwise, he'd at best be a wide receiver 5 in LA. I do like Jordan McFadden a lot in the 150s, somebody who has been very effective at left tackle for Clemson, but could be a transition candidate to guard because he's only 6'2", but he actually has 34-inch arms to complement his wide build with powerful quads, which make him explosive out of his stance, being able to uproot free techniques and combos, with the strong grip to torque bodies out of the lane. Does a nice job of freeing rushers on the edge, with some impressive balance to swallow stabs at his frame and brace against power, being able to lock guys up in tight quarters, and showing a hell of understanding for protections. Not the lightest on his feet when getting into open space, and gets beat across his face by scraping linebackers a few times, and in protection, his base can get a little too wide, where he ends up having to kick back and give up ground to get back under control. Obviously, this guy won't supplant Rashawn Slater at left tackle, and the coaching staff has done a good job of at least turning Trey Pickens on the opposite end into an acceptable starter, but at least McFadden should give them another piece with inside flexibility, similar to another late round selection from a year ago in Brandon Jaimes. I just think with how sound his technique as a pass protector is, and how he reads rushers, he's pretty ready to go. Scott Matlock at pick 200 is a guy at 6'4", 295 pounds, with a burly build combined with a worker bee mentality and good pad level, plays with heavy hands in the run game, and is able to stay at the line of scrimmage with extension consistently, while showcasing impressive anchor strength against vertical combos, but also the lateral mobility to stay square as he flows with zone runs, and effectively falls back a gap as the back tries to cut it up behind him. Too often he gets knocked with the inside foot off the ground as the lineman comes his way on an angle, and Matlock ends up on the turf, and he lacks the quick twitch or creativity to give you a lot of different looks as a pass rusher, but as a pocket pusher and his ability to get home at times, even after spiking into somebody off twists, make him a valuable rotational piece, and I think his skill set fits extremely well with the gap and a half mentality up front to counterbalance the light box counts there in LA. The Bolts continue to add space eaters to that unit, and I think even though he's probably IDL 5 there, we could see him get extended playing time if there are any injuries. And then of course the Chargers reunited the top 2 receivers from TCU with the former quarterback in Max Duggan in the 7th round. Tremendous competitor, and was the biggest reason along with the arrival of new head coach Sonny Dykes for turning his TCU program into a championship contender, delivered in so many key spots with his arms and legs, wiggling himself out of seemingly impossible situations, and somehow pulling off these late game wins. And he's not afraid to stare at the barrel of the gun and somehow make things happen. Made several big time NFL throws hanging in the pocket and driving the ball with velocity, launching deep bombs, showing some sidearm stuff to flip it out to his backs after reading deep. And this is a strong, tough runner who pulls his legs out of the grasp of tacklers, lowering his pads in short yardage and goal line situations, and driving through contact, while having better speed than he's given credit for, with a 4.52 at the combine. I just believe his mechanics can be all over the place, and because of that his accuracy kind of comes and goes, with several badly under and overthrown passes for Quentin Johnston, completely unaware of hang defenders and guys that aren't in his vision on extended plays, and so much of his production came off screens or those isolated shots down the field. So while the chemistry would theoretically be there, he's not going to replace Justin Herbert on the center anytime soon. As a backup that can get you out of a bad spot and deliver something with his legs, I think he can stick around, although I believe Easton Stick is a very solid number 2, and that can end up being the newly designated emergency number 3 quarterback. The first thing that comes to mind thinking about this collection of picks from a broader perspective is the fact that they add some dynamic ability with those 2 TCU receivers. The next part would be versatility in the front 7, where Thule could be this multifaceted pressure player, and Henley provides the range and coverage profile to really take that second level to new heights. I personally would have gone with a different receiver at the top. Once again, I think you can find a gadget player and return specialist a little later than pick 125 probably, and we can argue if they wouldn't have been better off taking one of the million corners in this draft over any of the names that selected on day 3 altogether. I thought they had opportunities to keep investing into the secondary altogether, where they are actually pretty thin, beyond the starting spots plus one other guy each. Love the value on Henley, who I looked at as a top 50 overall player in this class, but otherwise not really any surplus value selections, and I'd say a little early at least on the 3 out of the top 4 names that they took here. Which brings me to our divisional draft rankings, and I had a bit of a tough time deciphering through these, but as you can see I've got the Broncos at number 1, slightly ahead of the Chargers and Raiders tied for 2nd, and the Chiefs at the bottom. We can argue over if Denver chose the right strategy, using a couple of trade-ups on 2 of the top 3 players selected, but I think who they got across those 5 picks, you can find a lot of positives, showing the conviction of bringing Sean Payton's wide receiver of choice in Marvin Mims, and once again opening up a discussion among the league about one of the guys already that they have there at wide receiver. You get a chess piece on defense potentially in Drew Sanders, who can be used as an alignment versatile pressure player. Riley Moss being a starting level corner in a deep class with impressive playmaking skills, and then some more depth at safety and interior O-line, It's only 5 players, but they may all fulfill a certain role. I have the Chargers and Raiders in a tie, because while I think those classes are pretty cohesive and could certainly help the teams out, they didn't make a ton of selections that presented surplus value. Finally, both reached on a specific type of receiver around pick 100 and neglected a position group that could really turn into a problem area for them eventually. Very different stages of their life cycles, some people would argue, but both teams actually have some veteran contracts on the books that they're kind of stuck with for now, and the reach of both of these coaching staffs might be shorter than some people want to give it credit for, if those draft classes can't help take them to the next step. And finally, I guess Kansas City will have to live with me putting them at the bottom of the list in exchange for those rings around the fingers. As I mentioned, I do like the mix of a couple of high ceiling, developmental prospects at offensive tackle and edge defender, and the lesser talented but solid role players that they might have added here for minimal cash. However, I could see the 5 picks that they made rounds 3 to 7 combined for just around 500 total snaps outside of special teams as rookies, and I just can't get on board with the Rashee Rice pick for that amount of draft capital when I had him outside my top 15 receivers, and at best they can hope he turns into Juju, who's worth $8 million annually on the open market as a proven asset. But that is it. Our 2023 Divisional Draft and Roster Review Series is done. All 32 teams, 259 players selected, a bunch of talking points about roster construction, draft capital valuation, and so much more. I really hope you enjoyed the series, and if you haven't checked out the other videos yet, all 8 divisions are now available right here on my channel. Thank you so much for watching this one. As always, show me you enjoyed the analysis by giving a thumbs up, subscribing for future episodes, which at this point, if you're still here and haven't done so yet, what the hell are you even doing? And if you could let a friend know about my detailed work to actually provide quality analysis instead of silly debates some other TV channels may offer at this point of the calendar year, I would really appreciate that. I'll be back next week already with a written piece on the most improved position groups in the NFL this offseason. That'll be over on my page helloswithfootballtalk.com, where you can find all my other content as well. Link is down below in the description, along with my social media handles, if you want to stay in touch throughout the offseason and know whenever I put out new stuff, which generally is once a week, even for the majority of the summer, other than 1 week usually. In the meantime, you can listen to the breakdowns of all the other divisions, read up on my draft profiles more extensively, if you want to really study up on the players your favorite team just selected, and of course, I always appreciate any type of feedback or just thoughts down below in the comments. So, until then, see you later. Peace!